Whenever webcam feeds disappear, research updates stop, and security fences suddenly appear around ancient ruins. People start imagining the wildest possibilities. Secret artifacts, government cover-ups, even alien technology. That's exactly what's happening right now at Göbekli Tepe. Viral posts claim governments are seizing mysterious objects in the middle of the night. And some headlines even suggest the United States Department of Defense has stepped in to hide discoveries that could rewrite history. But the real story unfolding across the ancient sites of the Taş Tepeler is even more surprising. Yes, the area is under unusually tight control. But it's not a military lockdown. It's something archaeologists call an academic embargo. And the discoveries being studied behind the scenes could dramatically change what we know about the origins of human civilization. For decades, the discovery of Göbekli Tepe was hailed as the absolute, undeniable starting point of human civilization. Dated to roughly 9,600 BCE, it completely shattered the old, comfortable archaeological models that had been taught in universities for generations. Before this site was unearthed, history textbooks confidently stated that humanity followed a very strict, linear, and predictable path of progression. We were told that ancient humans were simple, wandering hunter-gatherers who spent all their time just trying to survive the harsh elements, chasing herds of wild animals across the frozen tundra with simple spears. According to this old model, it was only after we accidentally discovered agriculture and learned to domesticate wild wheat that we finally settled down in one place. Once we had a stable, reliable food supply, we supposedly had the free time to build complex societies, invent organized religion, and eventually carve monumental architecture. We were taught that the farm had to come first, and the temple came second. Göbekli Tepe violently flipped that entire script upside down. The site features massive 20-ton T-shaped limestone pillars arranged in perfect, mathematically precise geometric circles. These towering stones are intricately carved with complex, three-dimensional reliefs of scorpions, lions, vultures, and spiders. And yet, when archaeologists sifted through the dirt surrounding these monuments, there was absolutely no evidence of agriculture or domesticated living at the time of its initial construction. It proved the complex human organization, deeply ingrained religion, and monumental engineering actually came first. However, even in the face of this massive revelation, the academic consensus remained somewhat conservative. Historians concluded that while these Ice Age hunter-gatherers were surprisingly good at carving stone, they were still fundamentally just nomadic wanderers. The accepted academic story was that these ancient people traveled hundreds of miles to this specific hilltop solely to build a temporary ritual site, held their religious ceremonies, and then immediately dispersed back into the wilderness to hunt and forage. Because archaeologists originally found no evidence of permanent houses, trash pits, or local water sources, they assumed it was physically impossible for a large population to actually live there permanently. But the newest, most heavily guarded excavations at Karahan Tepe have violently shattered that final assumption. As archaeologists carefully expanded their digging outward from Göbekli Tepe into the greater Taş Tepeler region, they realized they had completely misunderstood the sheer scale and ambition of the ancient architecture. At the original site of Göbekli Tepe, the massive pillars are freestanding. They were quarried from a nearby limestone bed, dragged across the landscape, and placed upright in the shallow holes in the dirt. It is an incredible feat of labor, but it is a traditional way of building. But at Karahan Tepe, the ancient builders took a vastly more difficult, incredibly punishing approach to their architecture. They did not just build their monuments on top of the earth. They literally carved their monuments directly out of the earth itself. Researchers recently uncovered a series of monumental enclosures at Karahan Tepe that are carved seamlessly into the solid limestone bedrock. The undisputed crown jewel of this terrifyingly complex architectural discovery is a staggering, massive structure that archaeologists are currently referring to as an amphitheater. This structure boasts a diameter of over 17 meters, or roughly 55 feet. To create this massive subterranean room, the ancient engineers had to mathematically map out a massive, perfect circle on the surface of the rocky ground. Then, using absolutely no metal tools, no iron pickaxes, and no bronze chisels, they had to meticulously break, chip, and carve away thousands upon thousands of tons of solid limestone bedrock to sink the entire complex deep into the earth. The walls of this amphitheater are not made of stacked stones. They are the living rock of the mountain itself, smoothed and shaped by human hands over 11,000 years ago. This level of bedrock excavation requires an incomprehensible amount of organized, brute force labor. You cannot carve a 17-meter amphitheater out of solid rock with a small, wandering band of 20 nomads. You need hundreds, perhaps thousands, of dedicated, highly skilled stonecutters working in perfect, rhythmic synchronization for years on end. This is not the work of wandering hunters setting up a temporary seasonal camp. This is permanent, highly calculated subterranean architecture designed to last for millennia. The sheer mathematical precision required to carve a perfect circle into an uneven mountain floor proves that these people possessed an advanced understanding of geometry and spatial planning. They were terraforming the landscape to fit their exact architectural blueprint. But carving a massive, sunken room out of solid rock introduces a massive, seemingly impossible logistical problem. It is the exact problem that caused historians to originally think these sites were only temporary. That problem is water. The Tash Templar region is incredibly arid and dry. If you have a massive stationary workforce of thousands of people spending years chiseling subterranean amphitheaters out of solid limestone, they need millions of gallons of fresh water just to survive the blistering heat, mix their mud mortars, and process their daily food. For years, historians confidently pointed to the complete lack of a nearby flowing river as absolute, undeniable proof that these sites could only support temporary, seasonal visitors who carried their water with them in animal skins. The ancient engineers, however, were entirely aware of this geographic limitation, and they solved it with a brilliant, breathtaking feat of civil engineering that is only now coming to light. Recent, highly focused bedrock excavations have identified intricate, sprawling networks of rock-cut basins, channels, and deep cisterns carved directly into the limestone surface across the entire complex. The builders of Karahan Tepe and Göbekli Tepe essentially turned the entire bedrock foundation of their sacred sites into a massive, highly integrated rainwater harvesting machine. They understood exactly how water flowed across the natural landscape, and they manipulated it to their absolute advantage. When the heavy, seasonal rains fell on the hillsides, the water did not just wash away uselessly into the dirt. It was carefully collected by the carved topography, directed through precisely angled geometric channels cut into the stone, and funneled flawlessly into deep, carved storage basins protected from the evaporating sun. This is an incredible demonstration of applied fluid dynamics. The engineers had to calculate the slope of the land, the volume of the rainfall, and the capacity of their cisterns to ensure that the water flowed smoothly without overflowing or stagnating. This advanced water management system proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that these sites supported massive, permanent, year-round settlements. They weren't just visiting the temple for a quick winter solstice ceremony. They had physically engineered the landscape to sustain a thriving, permanent city right at the absolute end of the last ice age. If carving massive amphitheaters out of solid mountains and engineering complex fluid dynamics out of the bedrock wasn't enough to completely break the historical timeline, a groundbreaking research paper published in late 2025 delivered the final, crushing blow to the old textbooks. This discovery is perhaps the most heavily debated and fiercely guarded secret of the new excavations because it involves the very floor these ancient people were walking on. When you imagine an 11,000-year-old temple built by people wearing animal skins, you naturally imagine the builders walking on a floor made of packed dirt, or perhaps some rough-hewn, uneven stone slabs. But researchers analyzing the artificial flooring at the deepest levels of these sites discovered the widespread, intentional use of a material known as terrazzo. Today, terrazzo is a highly premium, incredibly durable composite flooring material used in high-end modern office buildings, luxury homes, and expensive museums. It is a smooth, polished surface that looks like a mosaic of crushed stone suspended in a solid matrix. The absolute shock to the archaeological community is that over 11,000 years ago, the builders of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe were artificially manufacturing this exact same composite material. This is where the story firmly shifts away from simple stone masonry and dives headfirst into the realm of heavy, complex industrial chemistry. The ancient people were not just cutting rocks, they were chemically altering the molecular structure of the earth to create synthetic building materials. To create a genuine terrazzo floor, the ancient builders had to master the incredibly difficult, highly dangerous process of manufacturing quicklime. You cannot just dig quicklime out of the ground. It does not exist in a natural, usable state. To create it, you have to mine raw limestone from the earth, crush it into smaller pieces, and then violently burn it in massive, highly controlled kilns. But you cannot just throw limestone into a campfire and hope for the best. The chemical conversion of limestone into quicklime requires sustained, blistering temperatures exceeding 900 degrees Celsius, or roughly 1,650 degrees Fahrenheit. Furthermore, this intense, agonizing heat must be maintained evenly and consistently for days or even weeks at a time. Achieving and maintaining a 900-degree fire is an absolute logistical nightmare, especially for a society that supposedly had no advanced technology. It requires an astronomical, almost incomprehensible amount of dry timber. The ancient laborers would have had to strip entire forests bare just to feed the roaring kilns. It requires an intimate, deeply scientific understanding of thermal dynamics, airflow, and ventilation to ensure the fires burned hot enough without suffocating under their own ash. And it requires a massive, perfectly coordinated labor force working in dangerous shifts around the clock just to keep the inferno fed. Once the massive fires finally died down and the raw limestone had been successfully, chemically altered by the extreme heat into caustic quicklime, the dangerous work was only half finished. Quicklime is incredibly volatile and highly reactive. If it touches wet skin, it causes severe chemical burns. The ancient chemists had to carefully collect this volatile powder, mix it with exactly the right ratio of fresh water, and blend it with crushed colored rocks, pebbles, and animal bones to create a thick, wet slurry. They then poured this caustic chemical mixture perfectly flat across the massive, sprawling floors of their stone enclosures. As the chemical reaction cured and hardened into a solid sheet of artificial stone, the laborers would spend countless agonizing hours polishing the surface by hand with sand and smooth stones until it was perfectly smooth, completely waterproof, and visually stunning. This process represents a profound lost technology of high-heat chemical processing that simply was not supposed to exist for several more millennia, according to everything we thought we knew about human evolution. The ability to control fire at industrial temperatures to chemically manufacture synthetic building materials did not happen until the invention of pottery and the dawn of the Bronze Age, thousands of years later. Yet here is the undeniable physical proof poured perfectly flat onto the bedrock of Göbekli Tepe, proving that Ice Age humans were master chemists. They understood exactly how to manipulate the molecular bonds of the Earth using extreme heat, and they deployed this technology on a massive, monumental scale. This terrifyingly advanced level of ancient engineering is exactly why the academic world is moving so incredibly slowly and why the internet naturally assumes there is a massive, sinister cover-up. There are no aliens hiding in the hills of Turkey, and the Pentagon is not classifying the site to hoard ancient laser weapons. The truth is much more grounded, but arguably much more difficult to accept. Academia is currently experiencing a profound foundational identity crisis. For over a century, historians and archaeologists have built their entire careers, their published papers, and their prestigious university departments on a very specific, comfortable timeline of human progress. They built an entire academic empire on the idea that human intelligence was a slow, agonizingly gradual crawl out of the dark. But the solid bedrock of Göbekli Tepe and Göbekli Tepe proves that Ice Age humans were absolutely not the grunting, primitive cavemen of our old textbooks. They were master civil engineers who could calculate and carve 17-meter amphitheaters out of solid mountains. They were brilliant environmental planners who deeply understood fluid dynamics well enough to build massive, integrated rainwater harvesting grids in the desert. And they were highly sophisticated industrial chemists who mastered high-heat thermal processing to pour artificial, polished composite floors. They did all of this without wheels, without iron, and without the benefit of written language. We are currently staring at these partially excavated sites, realizing that the story of human progress is absolutely not a straight, comforting line moving steadily from primitive ignorance to modern brilliance. It is a cycle. The biological and architectural data trapped in the bedrock of southern Turkey strongly points to a cyclical nature of human rise and fall. It suggests that there were towering peaks of intense human organization, processing, and society deep in the Ice Age that possessed highly advanced, lost technologies. These technologies, these brilliant flashes of civil engineering and industrial chemistry, eventually faded away, violently scattered by shifting climates or lost to the brutal ravages of time, only to be slowly, painfully reinvented by our ancestors thousands of years later. The ruins currently sitting under heavy guard in southern Turkey are not hiding a science fiction conspiracy, and they are not concealing the technology of an extraterrestrial empire. They are hiding a mirror. As the slow, meticulous excavations continue, we are being forced to look deeply into an ancient reflection of our own engineering genius that we had completely, tragically forgotten. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were just as smart, just as capable, and just as ambitious as we are today. They simply used different tools to conquer their world. And as the embargoed data slowly begins to leak out into the peer-reviewed journals, we are finally realizing the most humbling truth of all. We are not the pinnacle of human history. We are just the latest chapter in a very long, very complicated, and incredibly brilliant book that we have only just begun to read.